Amazing. Thank you everyone for being here. Welcome everyone to another Localized event. If you are new to our community, at Localized, we are a global platform where we connect students and recent graduates from emerging markets like yourself, who's joining in now. So we connect you guys to job opportunities and career resources. And when we say career resources, we also mean an amazing pool of experts who are here to guide you in your career decisions, in whatever path you're selecting, if you're transitioning jobs, or if you're just like trying to figure it out still in college, what you want to do next when you graduate. That's why our experts are here to help you with. So as you might know, today we're gonna be talking about a really exciting topic. So we're gonna be talking about careers in climate and how does that look for you when you graduate? Like what type of jobs are out there, and just like the trends that we can see happening right now. So our expert that who's gonna be talking about that today is Karang Kim Ji. So he leads commercial activities at 4401 building technology to market pathways. He has experience also in merger and acquisition strategy and consulting in the energy sector. So he has advised a number of utilities and infrastructure funds across Europe and the Middle East in areas like decarbonization, renewable energy, diversification, electricity, gas, energy retail, and many more. He's also a Harvard Business School MBA graduate from last year, so congratulations, Karan, for that. And he's based in Oman right now, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, just sharing also your country as we ask all of the attendees. So I guess I will stop right there. We're gonna hear more about his journey, about what he does, and about the sector in general. And then just a quick reminder before we start, if you guys have any questions at any point, don't wait to send them. So you can always send your questions on the chat or in the Q&A function that should be showing for you at the bottom of your screen. So I suggest you just send your questions as soon as you think of them so you don't forget them. And we'll make sure to answer them either along the talk or after the talk, okay? So I will pass it on to you now. So the stage is yours.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everybody. Michelle, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. It's always an awesome opportunity to talk to people that are passionate about the climate and trying to getting into the sector, especially students. So really good to meet you all. I thought I would start with a short presentation about me and my company, 4401. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Please let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, we're seeing your screen right now. Yes, that's perfect.
Great. So I'll run through this relatively quickly. I want to leave more time for Q&A. You know, this is mainly for you guys, not for me. So feel free to push me in the right direction towards what you're interested in learning about. I founded a company called 4401 3 years ago. We eliminate carbon dioxide. The problem that we're trying to tackle is the greatest challenge of our time. We are at a tipping point and multiple tipping points in the history of humankind, and the implications are absolutely astounding. And we're all experiencing it in our various parts of the world, especially in this diverse group. I personally have experienced a significant impacts of climate change here in Oman, where I'm from and where I'm based. I mean, we're already a hot country, so it's not necessarily getting hotter, but we do have implications on marine life, increased desertification, and it's becoming natural disasters become even more common here in the country, and a lot of these events have become just a common staple of our daily news. One thing that people don't really understand, but is very, very true, is that we have a gigantic invisible waste. The key word here is invisible, because really the landfill is not what we would expect to see. The landfill whether we're talking about here for greenhouse gases and for carbon dioxide is our atmosphere. And you can see how thin and fragile that actually is. We're pumping 100 million tons of CO2 per day into the atmosphere today in the world. That accumulates to about 35 to 40 billion tons of just carbon dioxide, not to mention all the other greenhouse gases. It pretty much ends up at about 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide plus carbon dioxide equivalents pumped into the atmosphere every year. And we're just letting it go. The fact that we can't see it doesn't mean that it's not happening. The IPCC and other UN climate bodies have already identified that we will surpass 1.5 degrees Celsius this decade, and humankind has never experienced these type of CO2 levels before. So this is a challenge that needs to be addressed today. There are warning signs. In Oman, for example, we've recently identified the world's largest dead zone in the ocean, just off the coast of the city that I live in Muscat, where there is an entire area almost the size of Florida that doesn't have any marine life, that is devoid of oxygen. And I mentioned a few of these others, but the real implication is that over time, this impacts our health in many ways, not just air pollution, but in the food that we eat, in the air that we breathe, of course, in the way that we live. So we need to reduce and remove carbon dioxide, tackle the grand problem. So these are two charts from the IPCC that shows that if we don't, if we continue as we are, we're going to be hitting nearly 4 or 4.5 degrees of warming above the baseline that was measured before the pre-industrial age. And what we need to do to bring that temperature down is to just change the way that we operate, change the way that we work, that we live, and that we produce. There's two ways to do that. We reduce the emissions that are being created through our industrial processes, through the way that we live, and we remove the remaining emissions that cannot be reduced due to various reasons. I've started off quite a downer, but my point here is that this is not just an end all. This is a massive opportunity for all of you, all of us, to contribute and participate in the most transformational event to ever happen to humankind. It's going to completely change the way that we operate and the way that we behave. And there's so much that we can do to contribute to building the new sustainable green world and allowing humankind to prosper in a clean way. The world is listening and they're acting. In the last few years, this has become even more apparent with things like rising green investment and jobs. For example, with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, a similar mechanism that's been built in Europe. There's increasing demand for sustainable products all across the world, increasing demand for critical minerals that feed the energy transition. And there's supply chains that have been disrupted by people, by industries that are demanding more sustainable supply chains that are not emitting CO2 for their industrial productions. So what am I talking about here? What are we trying to do? So 4401 is the name of the company, but we're named after CO2. 4401 literally is the molecular mass of carbon dioxide. And the reason we named the company that is because we see CO2 as an opportunity, not just a challenge. It's an opportunity to tap into to change the way we live. And our vision is to use our technology, mineralization, which I'll explain in a second, to return the planet to sustainable levels of atmospheric CO2. But we're not dumping into the landfill of the atmosphere anymore, but really operating within the bounds of what the planet allows us to do in its natural cycle of emission and storage. So I'm the Chief Commercial Officer here at 4401. So I develop our route to market. I'm a firm believer that it's much easier to adopt and scale technology or an idea if it's feasible and if it allows people to do it easily. That's obvious. It's much harder to do when you're relying on someone's goodwill. So what we're trying to do here is make a solution and make a technology that allows the world to operate in a different way, but not stop growing at the same time, because everyone wants to seek growth. Everyone wants to seek opportunity. So let this be an opportunity rather than a challenge. Our CEO, Talal, he and I have gone back several years. We're family friends. We were both hiking in the wadis and the nature here in Oman, and realizing the impacts of climate change, which inspired us to build this solution. And then we have our two technical co-founders here that have actually developed the science and the technology to run this process. We also have a world-class team of around 50 people now working at 4401 to fight this grand challenge. So what we do is that we take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or from industrial processes, and we return it where it came from. So instead of extracting fossil fuels from the subsurface, we inject that CO2 into the subsurface and react it with a very specific rock called peridotite that actually changes that CO2, its chemical composition, from a gas into another rock, into a completely inert mineral that is harmless to the atmosphere, is harmless to the environment, and completely eliminates that CO2 from existence. We do that by powering our entire process with renewable energy, and we create effectively a sparkling water. We mix CO2 with water and we inject that into this rock. It is the most permanent form of carbon removal because we create a rock that can never release that CO2 back into the atmosphere. It's completely safe because it is inert. And it's a natural process that is actually occurring as we speak. The rock here in Oman is absorbing carbon dioxide. What we're doing is just accelerating that process to take in more meaningful amounts that can have an impact on climate change. The rock I'm talking about is peridotite, and this is the reaction that happens in nature. So you can see this picture here at the bottom of the slide, which is the actual rock with the absorbed carbon dioxide, which is these white veins. So the CO2 is trapped in rock mineral form forever. And it stays like that, never gets re-released. So what we're doing is just building and accelerating more of this. We've so far achieved a little bit of success. So we were granted the world's first concession in Oman to scale our technology. We've partnered with major regional players that are interested in investing in and building out this as a potential solution to climate change. We have various partners all over the world that are partnering with us in structurally building these projects. And we were we were winner of a few prizes, including one of the Carbon Removal X prizes, which is funded by Elon Musk, and the Earthshot Prize, which was a Prince William's Royal Foundation Prize for the environment and sustainability last year. So our technology addresses both these elements that from the chart earlier. We're able to help industry reduce the emissions that they cause, but we also enable removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere directly. But we are an early stage technology. There's so much more work to do. And now I want to talk about what other solutions, what other ways can everyone else get involved? Because what I'm trying to build here at 4401 is still pretty early stage. There's a long way for us to go, and there's so many more things that need to be done to tackle the climate crisis. So in this chart on the left from our world data, it shows the industries that cause the most emissions. And now I'm talking specifically about CO2. There's a whole other host of ways that you can help the planet, of course. But if we look just at emissions, the energy industry is by far the largest, and it can be broken down to various other parts. For example, transportation, which causes 16% of emissions, and that can be broken down further into aviation, road transport, etc. Agriculture and forestry is the next one. So the way we eat. Waste is the next one, the way we operate. And industry is the way we consume. So all these elements need to change. They need to continue to exist, but they need to change. And so every company that's working in these sectors needs to completely change the way they operate. And that's going to have massive implications on the way they recruit, the way they operate, the way they produce, and the way they remain sustainable. So a few examples of emissions reductions in this case are renewable energy, energy efficiency, so using things like heat pumps instead of gas pumps, the sustainably built world, which is building sustainable buildings rather than energy non-energy efficient buildings. So there's actually ways to build structures that retain more heat or more air conditioning, waste less energy. There's electric vehicles, sustainable farming practices, and zero carbon industrial production. This is just a few of them, but there's so many ways to start looking at the climate problem in the opportunities that exist within our existing workplaces. So what we're doing at 4401 is the bottom half of this chart is focused on the carbon removal. So that's actually taking CO2 out after it's been emitted or when it's already in the atmosphere. Whereas these solutions are stopping those emissions from happening in the first place. The reason that we need to exist as carbon removal is that you can't remove all the emissions. You can't completely eliminate the existence of CO2 from all industrial operations. For example, it's even if airlines are able to fully power themselves using sustainable aviation fuel, the production of sustainable aviation fuel itself releases some CO2. So there is going to be CO2 still around, even if we reach a net zero world. And that's why it's called net zero. It's not zero, it's actually plus and then minus, which allows us to arrive at a net zero. And these are the minuses: planting trees, building sustainable farming practices that allows soil to absorb more carbon. In our case, enhanced weathering, which is using rocks to absorb carbon dioxide. There's using the ocean, which is the largest carbon sink, to absorb carbon dioxide through, for example, kelp farming, things like that, mangroves. What I'm trying to say here is that every company is a climate company. And I think that's a misconception that most people don't understand. So in the 2000s, when the internet was becoming a large part of our world, there used to be people saying, I want to work at an internet company. Now, 25 years later, every company is an internet company. You almost cannot operate unless you're online. And it's the same thing with climate. Today, we're saying, I want to work for a climate company. But in fact, every company needs to become a climate company, because every company needs to figure out how to contribute to solving the problem of climate change. It affects everybody, and we all need to contribute to it. And that's where the opportunity lies for you all. So I'll just end very quickly here with a couple of pieces of advice, and then we can dive into some Q&A. What can you do right now? The first thing is find opportunities in your existing roles or in your existing workplaces, or even in your schools, your communities, your societies, that enable climate forward decision making. So be the voice in the room for climate. Join sustainability teams, create your own sustainability teams and initiatives. Find a way to contribute in the societies that you're already part of, because there are ways to do that and contribute to building a sustainable world. The second, seek out opportunities in tech companies and climate tech companies like mine. They're a little bit more early stage. They're focused on engineering talent at the moment because we're trying to build new technology. But there's a space for everyone to try to participate in the, for now, nurturing climate tech space. And then third, do it like me. Build your own company or your project. And it doesn't have to be something that, is the next, I don't know, Tesla. Every small project is going to make a difference. And the way that we fight climate change is not by one solution. Everything needs to be done and tried and tested. The solution is really defeat by a billion cuts. It's not just a one take all. So there's so many ways to try to fight the challenge, to remove CO2, to build solutions that impact every type of ecosystem that we operate in. And yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, but I'm happy to take more questions about whatever you guys are interested in and how I can help.
Thank you so much. That was really, really insightful. And I love how you ended with that note of like every company is a climate company, which I think it's a great mindset for everyone to have here. Because that's right, like I don't think many of us are already in that like mindset. Again, like I don't think we're like acknowledging that fact, which is like really, really true. And like the example you made with the internet, it's like a great example. Like we wouldn't know, or like people back then wouldn't know or imagine that that will happen. So on that note, I would like to ask you a question before I see a lot of questions coming up. But before we take those questions in and keep sending those questions, I want to ask you, even though every company is a climate company, in let's say we're gonna name them climate focused companies like yours, I'm curious, what are like the types of junior roles that a student can expect? And it's okay if it's only engineering, as you mentioned, which might be the focus right now. But it can be either in your company or other companies who are doing like similar things, or like with other strategies to try to work in climate. What are those examples of like junior roles? Just to have an example for everyone listening here, maybe they're still in college, so they can have maybe a picture in their heads of like what can they expect to apply to.
Sure. So most companies in the climate space right now are the junior roles that are available are, I guess, can be grouped into three areas. So the first is technical. That's specifically engineers, spontaneous, scrappy engineers that can think out of the box. And usually those are the ones that help with designing processes. In our case, for example, our injection processes or capture processes. Um, and they can. The reason that we like junior, we have a lot of students or fresh grads that join our business in Oman. The reason that we like them is because they haven't been tenured or trained in a mature industry already, and so it allows them to be more scrappy, more open-minded, less structured, and that's kind of what we need. We need people to think outside of the box. So if you can demonstrate that as a student, I think you'll go a long way. The second is commercial teams. So people that can understand business models, how to sell credits, how to generate credits, how to actually take technology to market, which is basically what I do. And that's can come in terms of roles. It can come in the form of junior analysts to help scope out market opportunities, help scope out buyer groups that would be interested in credits, help understand how to verify and monitor, report credits, engage with stakeholders in the sales space or the buyer space. The third group is policy and regulation. This is a really key one. A lot of what is going to enable climate tech companies is the relevant structures in government, in regulatory spaces in the countries that every company operates in. And a lot of junior roles are coming up with companies that are trying to engage regulators, engage governments, engage policy to make them more accommodating for climate tech companies. So I'm seeing a lot of junior roles in the policy making space to help communicate the benefits of climate change, of climate technologies to the relevant stakeholders in those spaces.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. And I guess a follow-up question or related question that we actually have in the Q&A. It's if there are like any specific skills that are preferred to break into the climate industry. And I guess it depends on like the type of job of this like categories you were mentioning, but if there's like any general like soft skills or like any knowledge someone might have, should have to break into this industry, what are those?
You know, it's a difficult question to answer because there are none. And I think that's the hard part about this is that the skill sets that already exist in all different job functions are relevant from the climate industry. You're not trying to build anything new. You're just trying to think in a different way. And so I guess the soft skill I would try to pin down, if there was one, is trying to be really really scrappy and really open-minded about how you approach problem solving. There are education systems that train you to think in a very specific way, you know, X plus Y equals whatever. In a lot of these environments at the moment, we're trying to break down the structures that have been created around us because they have been built around the fossil fuel industry or the way that the status quo has always operated. I think to go, let's say you're interviewing with one of these companies, to go and show them that you can really think outside the box, think in a different way, to a structured environment, challenge the status quo, um, and be humble to learn, is really the characteristics that'll get you far in this industry. Because no one knows what the solutions are. We're all trying to figure it out together, and it really just involves being humble, wanting to learn really quickly, and challenging yourself and the structures that you've learned in, and challenging those around you.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's see. So there's a specific question coming from Kirti. So they're saying they're doing their masters right now in botany. So they're asking you if you have like any like tips or any like insights on what could the next step be, I guess related to like what they're studying and what they could do in the climate area.
Sure. So, Kirti, did I see that you are from India? I'll address that specifically in the Indian market context because I think that's really interesting. In India right now, there's a massive move towards using forest plants to sequester carbon. So I think that would be your best pathway if I was to point one, is look for the opportunities that the agriculture industry, the farming industry, or even startups that are servicing those industries are building to build more sustainable farming practices. There's a company that I recently read about. It's called MITI Labs, MITTI, or MATI Carbon, MATI. There's two different ones that are helping farmers commercialize or earn money from carbon credits that are generated from their soil on their land sequestering carbon. So there's ways to bring in the communities in India, especially in farming lands, to benefit off of this new carbon ecosystem that applies to many different countries in the world where agriculture is a large generator for GDP. For example, several countries in Africa, and it's definitely where botany degrees are going to be really useful, especially understanding how specific crops can be harvested, or sorry, not be harvested, be planted to sequester more carbon, and how you can distribute those earnings to landowners.
Great. Thank
That
you.
was
Thank you so
helpful.
much. And yeah, and thank you for bringing that specific example from their country. That's really great. And we have a similar question, but now in another region. So Donald is asking in the chat. So they're asking how can they join either your team or any other team on other company of CO2 sequestration. So they're saying they're doing a master's degree right now in renewable energy from Kenya.
Hey there, I'm looking for your comment, but I'm struggling to find it. I'll try to do my best to answer that question. So for my company in particular, at the moment, we're only operating in Oman and the UAE. The reason that is because the rock that we use for our mineralization process exists here at the moment. So we're not looking to hire any students or anyone else in any other countries just yet. But Kenya is a really interesting and very promising country for mineralization in particular, as well as carbon sequestration in general. The reason I say that, very pertinent to your work, is that Kenya has really cheap renewable energy. It has a massive geothermal reserve that can provide very cheap clean energy to carbon capture and carbon mineralization processes. And in the end, that clean, cheap energy is really what brings costs down and enables these technologies to become feasible. So there are carbon sequestration companies starting up in Kenya. I can name a couple I've heard of. There's one called Cella, CELLA. There's another one. I think it's a project developer, so they don't have their own technology, but they do put the pieces of the puzzle together, called Great Carbon Valley. That are looking to do storage projects or mineralization projects in the Rift Valley. And there's a direct air capture company called Octavia Carbon that are doing carbon capture in Kenya. I would say Kenya is probably the country I've heard about most in Africa that is developing tech for my space in particular for carbon capture and removal because of the largely talented technical workforce as well as the cheap renewable energy available. And I believe the regulatory and political system are very, very forward thinking to push that as well. So that's been helpful there. A master's in renewable energy is a great idea. Renewables, clean, cheap energy, and I've said it several times now, is the quickest way to remove and reduce CO2 emissions in every process. We use fuel for everything. So it is definitely the right way to go. It opens the most doors into the most technologies because we need energy to power everything.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we actually have a couple of people not asking question, but like sharing in the chat that they're actually using renewable energy in their homes. There's another person who just shared like the type of renewable energies they're using as well, like solar lamps and others. So if you have like any other experiences yourselves like that, you can also share that in the chat. We would love to know. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep reading the questions for you. So there's another question in the, so now it's in the Q&A function. Let's see. So staying on the renewable energy space for now, Husam is asking, how can junior renewable energy engineers navigate their path? So do you have like any tips or any different type of roles once you graduate in renewable energy specific for engineers that they can like seek out?
So I haven't walked that path yet. I can only tell you from, or I will not walk that path. It's not my space, but I can tell you from the observations I've made. For a renewable energy engineer, there are several different types of companies you can look at. The renewable energy space is really interesting. It depends on the country, but it can be highly decentralized and fragmented because of distributed generation. There are ways that renewable players are part of the entire value chain: generation, transmission, distribution, and not just a generation itself. So you can work for, you can apply to your state utilities or private utilities, renewable energy developers, so the ones that actually deploy the solar or wind or whatever technology in projects. That can involve an EPC provider, so the engineering, procurement, and construction companies, or the actual provider of the solar cells. They all need junior engineers. And then don't close yourself out to just the generation space. So this is an area that most people often neglect when thinking about renewables, is that there's going to be two main challenges with increased renewable generation. The first is that not only do we need to increase renewable generation for the energy transition, we also need to triple our energy generation as a whole. As population grows and as wealth increases across populations, people demand more energy. So we need to develop new renewables at a pace faster than we've ever developed fossil fuels in the past. So that's the first thing. The second is what changes dramatically when developing renewables is grid infrastructure. So at the moment, our grids in countries have been designed for fossil fuel production, where you have large base load generation facilities that distribute across the country. So your coal-fired power plant, gas-fired power plant. The beauty of renewables is that it's completely modular and decentralized. You can have a solar farm on your roof. You can have a solar farm on your farm. You can have a wind turbine offshore. And all these pieces of the puzzle are going to need to contribute to the grid. That means there's a massive balancing system to distribute that energy across from generation to the consumers. That is completely different from the way that those base loads have been managed in let's say concentrated form with fossil fuels. So the grid needs to change. Grid management needs to change. Grid efficiency structure needs to change. There's interconnection points that need to be built to all these renewable facilities. So I would not, if you're a renewable engineer, don't just look at, closing your opportunity off at the solar developer nearby or the wind developer. Look at engineering and procurement. Look at grids. Go work for your state grid utility, and help them build out functionality to onboard renewables. Yeah, so renewables will affect the entire chain, and so there's a lot of ways to get involved.
Thank you so much. We have two related questions, but I just want to mention that thank you for everyone who's sending the questions. I love how today's group is really asking questions for their own personal experience, which is great because that means you're really trying to get the insights from our expert, which is what they are here for, to guide you. So that's amazing. Keep sending your questions. Christine, I see you have your hand raised. But if you can type in the chat the question, that will be great. So we can make sure that we answer it, just because we have other questions coming up. Okay, so let's see. So there's two questions related to the one you just answered. So there's one in the chat coming from Oluchi. So they're sharing that they have an MBA in sustainability, in which they had some courses in renewable energy. So they're just asking, again, having an MBA in sustainability with a few courses in renewable energy, how do you think they fit in the climate area space? What type of roles can they aspire to with this education?
Sure. Hi, Lucy. So I assume this is a program that's not technical focused. So I'll answer it in that way. With climate technologies, we're basically developing carbon credits, and we're trying to sell those carbon credits to companies that are emitting carbon, so that they can offset that unit of carbon that they've emitted. I mentioned earlier that there is the carbon removal technologies that we're developing are actually going to be used only for the tail end of emissions that can never be reduced in the first place. Because what we do is expensive relative to using renewable energy. So what industries need to do first is figure out how to not emit at all. And then carbon removal technologies will take care of the elements that can never be removed in terms of carbon emissions. So what an MBA with sustainability, with a non-technical person in the sustainability space can do is advise these companies on how to actually go about developing strategies to eliminate emissions in the cheapest way possible. So, for example, go work at a corporate or an industrial player that has a decarbonization strategy or is motivated to remove carbon, and you can help them feel out how to actually do that. People say they want to do it, but they have no idea how. And the first step to that puzzle is doing it with your existing emissions. Go find the lowest hanging fruit. If you're a rental car company, I'm just making stuff up. Maybe you can get 5% of your vehicles as EVs, or you can buy renewable energy to power your office space, or you can mandate that your employees take trains rather than planes. Just small stuff like this, just the way that we operate can really make a big impact. And so that's one area. Another area is in sustainability is figuring out purchasing strategies for carbon credits for these corporates. So for example, we've seen a lot of airlines that have recently offered, when you buy your plane ticket, you can offset the emissions of your travel. That has an MBA or someone with sustainability experience sitting behind the desk, going and finding all those projects to then source those carbon credits from, and going and evaluating them, understanding what's best for their employer. So those are a couple of ways, but there's so many. There's so many, and like every company has to be a climate company. So go make that statement with your sustainability experience or degree.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that example. I never thought about like the person. I mean, it's not common to think that way, I guess, but I never thought about the person like creating this project that now I guess every airline has like this option that you mentioned. So that's really interesting. That could be you, Oluchi, in a year or in a few years doing something even greater than that. Okay, so let's see. We have another like more questions in the Q&A function. Someone is sharing that they're a third year undergraduate student, and so they want to know if you have like any tips at this stage specifically where they can prepare themselves to be marketable for the sustainable climate industry after they graduate. You already mentioned a couple of like, you mentioned like the soft skills they should develop. And you already mentioned depending on different like bachelor's or like master's program, the options they can seek out. Maybe if you have like any other ideas, or maybe how can they stay up on the trends, or like how can they stay up on whatever's happening in the sector. I guess that will be a good idea as well.
Let me answer the second part of your question first, is to stay up to date. That's really important. This entire space is rapidly evolving, and there's so many different parts of it. Sustainability as a word is so large, and you can group it into so many different facets. There's ESG. That's a term that's been used all over the planet in different ways, which is basically environment, society, and governance. And sustainability fits in all three of those ways. Then you can break down sustainability in all the ways I did earlier with, you can focus on CO2, you can focus on plastics, you can focus on waste. There's so many different areas. I think what's really important is when you're at an undergraduate stage is to start testing stuff and getting a feel for what you like and what you don't. I think Michelle froze, but can you guys hear me? Did I freeze? Okay, great. So yeah, I think it's really important to just start testing stuff. Start putting yourself in roles and jobs, in small internships that you can just learn what you like to do and what you don't like to do. In the end, this industry is going to be about following your passions, and the space is really, really large, and there's so much to do. So as an undergraduate, just start testing in small ways what you like to do and what you really don't. One thing I'll mention is there's this idea that an employer is always going to look for some kind of pattern in your resume. I have to do this first, and then that second, third, fourth, and if I don't follow that path, no one's going to recruit me because I haven't followed. So I don't have an explanation of how I went from one place to the next. Everyone does it. I did it too. That's not true. I'll tell you why, because I find it more interesting when I see someone jumping around because they're trying different things, trying to understand what they don't like and what they do like. And typically I ask them why, and that the answer I get is, well, because of all these experiences, now I know the direction I want to go in. So I like the variance. And I think a lot of employers like the variance. They just people don't know it. So don't be afraid to go off the beaten path. The whole sustainability space is off the beaten path. So yeah, I guess that's my long answer, is just start testing, start experimenting.
Thank you so much. And I lost everyone for a second. I lost connectivity for like a minute or so. So I lost part of the answer, but I did hear most of it. And I just want to add, thank you for that, Karen. And I just want to add, I don't see who asked that question because it was an anonymous question, but I just want to add in the chat this session. It's a recording from a session we had with actually Catherine, who was still here listening to this webinar. So she's part of the localized team, and we did a session months ago on the Green Talent Forum that we had. We had a lot of speakers coming up and talking about sustainability and green jobs in general, if you want to check it out. But this session in specific, I remember we also talk about how students could like start doing things, even like in like student groups or like college initiatives, to start developing those skills. So if you're interested to have like more options apart from like our expert already shared, like you can go ahead and check that session out. Great. So we have, I know we have just a couple of minutes more, but we still have a lot of questions. So we're gonna try to answer them as best as we can. So there's another question coming from in the Q&A as well, coming from Lyria. And so they're sharing that they're studying a master's in AI, and they would like to work in the climate change sector. So they're asking if you know any projects that they have used AI to solve climate change challenges, maybe to have an idea of what can they do with this master's in the climate space.
Sure, that's a good question. AI is going to play a really big role in helping us understand and predict how climate change is going to impact the way that we live. But it's also going to help us build technologies that are going to be more accurate in solving or finding solutions to climate change. So a couple of examples that I know off the top of my head where AI has been useful to climate. So firstly is using AI with satellite imagery to try to predict patterns of shifting climates across the world. And that can give information to people, to civil society, governments, agricultural industries on how to adapt their practices and how to better spend their resources to build more adaptable solutions for climate. So just as a pure example, there are satellite companies that track climate impacts on cities, and they provide that information to the mayors of those cities, and the mayors can use that information to then allocate capital to adaptation projects that are relevant for their cities. So AI can tell that mayor, your sea level is going to rise X% in this many years based on this data. So you need to spend your money here. That's one example. Another is geological and forestry and interpretation using satellite imagery as well. So AI can help project developers understand which best plants or which best crops to plant in certain areas of the world that are going to absorb the most carbon. How to measure the amount of carbon that's actually been absorbed into the soil, or in our case, into the rocks. Those are a couple of examples. So Google has done a lot of work on this, and I recommend you check it out. I'm just going to put it in the chat on how AI and machine learning is helping build climate solutions. I think that would be really informative.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And I'm gonna make sure to post this link in the event page. In case everyone who's watching the recording want to check that resource out, you will find it on the comment section below the event image. Great. So now let's see. We have a couple of more questions now, focus more on the sector in general and not on their personal like paths. So there's someone asking if you could explain a little bit more, if you have time in this 5 minutes, to explain a little bit more the technique you're using to convert CO2 into rock.
Sure. The rock that we tap into is a oceanic mantle rock. It's basically the ocean crust that's been thrust up onto the surface in certain parts of the world through tectonic activity. because it's oceanic crust and it's not in its natural state, it's highly reactive in its surficial form. The rock itself is alkaline, and when you have carbon dioxide in the air and it mixes with water, it forms a carbonic solution. So when rainwater lands on these rocks, it actually pushes, it reacts with the rock in a pH swing reaction, which I'm sure a few chemical engineers here would understand. The rock is alkaline and CO2 and water is acidic, and so it neutralizes into in this neutralization reaction. That neutralization reaction converts the original rock and the CO2 into a neutral inert rock mineral, which is mainly a composition of the existing elements in that rock in the first place. So for example, in our case, it's magnesites and calcites. Calcites, for example, are one of the most abundant minerals on the planet. So what we do at 4401 is that we're just accelerating that natural reaction. The natural reaction the process takes decades, hundreds of years. We can do it in months. And the way that we do that is engage more of that rock with more water and more CO2 at a quicker pace under higher pressure in the subsurface. So we have no additives, nothing else that catalyzes the reaction. The only thing is making water and CO2 interact with that rock more than you would in the natural world.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then there's another question. I guess they're just curious. They're wondering about the selling price of CO2 capture, if you have like an idea of that.
Yeah, it's the big question. It's what's going to make all these technologies feasible or unfeasible. The interesting thing is that there's no one answer. There is a huge range of capture and sequestration costs, and it really depends on the project in question and the technology in question. Each one has its pros and cons. So I'll talk about the two extremes. We are on one extreme because we have the most permanent form of removal, which is turning CO2 into rocks. Those rocks they just stay. They can never be released. That is the most expensive form of carbon removal because we're building sinks. Of course, we're getting our costs down, but it's still pretty high. Those carbon credits are going for, at the moment, $1,000 a ton, but they will get lower. On the other end, there's planting trees. It takes anyone can plant a tree pretty much. You can do it for as low as $5. And that credit can then be sold. So it's really a huge range. And the pros and cons, so the pro for us is that we have a very permanent solution, but it's very expensive. And on the other side, you have trees that is also needed. The whole range of solutions is very much needed, but trees can burn down and re-release that CO2 back into the atmosphere. So as an example, I was once on a trip to Seattle for some meetings, and I was in the plane and I actually saw an entire forest on fire, wildfire, right outside the city of Seattle, and it was just a huge area of forest that was allocated as an offset project for tech companies. That sink was made to sequester carbon, and then it re-released the CO2 back because it burned down. And with climate change, you can expect more wildfires. So it is cheap, and it is definitely a solution that we need. I mean, don't not plant trees, please do. But it's not the only thing. We need this whole portfolio of solutions. So I think in the end, what's going to happen is more a blended credit price, which is going to be priced based on the portfolio of solutions that are going to be built into packaged products that are sold to the market. So let's see what that blended price is. It'll depend on the supply of the cheapest versus the most expensive and everything in between.
Yeah, wow, that was someone, Vivian is also typing in the chat. She mentioned before, like, tree planting should be an habit then, which issue, but then when you share about like the wildfire, she was like, oh, so unfortunate. But thank you so much. I know we are on time. time flew by. I'm also really grateful for everyone for asking all these questions. If you have a question that we couldn't answer, you can always type that question on the comment section below the event image, and I'll make sure to either direct you to like 4401 website if that's the response you're looking for, or any other resource. We're always happy to have you. And yeah, there's a lot of thank yous for you in the chat. There's someone even saying that they're like really proud of your project and your efforts. So I just want to share those kind messages with you. Someone saying they have learned a lot today, me as well. So I just want to thank you so much for today. And before we go, I don't know if you have any last comments, any last tips.
Well, thanks for having me, first of all. I really enjoy these sessions, so however I can be helpful, please let me know. Yeah, just a final word. Don't forget, every company is a climate company. So find your opportunities. They exist. And if they don't, they're waiting for you to come and buy and capture them. So yeah, I wish you all the best of luck, and be the climate warriors I know you can be.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you in another localized session. Bye.
Thanks, Michelle.